September 12, 1683. The last rays of sunlight flicker over Vienna, casting shadows across smoke-filled skies. The city is silent, almost holding its breath as the final battle draws near. But what happened next would become one of the most legendary last-minute rescues in history. Before we dive deep into this story, subscribe to the channel so you never miss powerful and thought-provoking stories. Men and horses are strewn across the hills outside the city, dead victims of 3 days of desperate fighting between the armies of Europe and the powerful Ottoman Empire. In the city, less than 15,000 soldiers and civilians are left, desperately hugging their siege walls, worn out, demoralized, and almost out of bullets. The Ottoman siege has been unrelenting, with waves of troops washing against defenses, overpowering the outnumbered Europeans over and over again. But every night they've managed to hold on just enough to see another sunrise. But each evening they've managed to hold on by just enough to watch another sunrise. And with each sunrise, hope fades that relief will come in time. The end seems inevitable. In a few hours, the Ottomans will launch their final assault. Vienna is about to fall. Meanwhile, 120 kilometers to the west, an army is assembling. For 2 weeks, this force has been racing toward Vienna at top speed, covering more than 160 kilometers per day. Having marched a long and difficult way, they are poised to give the Ottomans a knockout punch. The relief army is made up of 18,000 horsemen, primarily from Poland, but also German, Hungarian, and Holy Roman Empire troops. Leading them is King John III Sobieski of Poland, one of Europe's most able horseman commanders. Behind him ride his 6,000 flying hussars, the elite shock cavalry unit with their black leather wings sprouting from the top of their helmets. They wear the wings to strike fear into their enemies' hearts. But today, they need not bother. The enemy already knows they are on their way. Rumors have reached the embattled defenders of Vienna for days that relief is on its way. But when the Ottoman scouts told them an 18,000-strong Polish cavalry force was on its way, the defenders within the city believed they had come to relieve them. But things were very different. As the Polish cavalry drew near, Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Ottoman commander, realized that he had a problem. He'd sent his finest men against the city, believing he'd be soon enjoying a grand victory. But now he had to contend with this surprise danger. He instructed his men to leave behind the siege works they'd built so carefully and pick up their swords. It was fight or die. The Ottomans retreated over the next few hours into the hills surrounding the battlefield and drew up in a great arc, facing the oncoming Poles. When the two armies clashed, there was no doubt who was going to win. The Europeans were new and full of resolve, and the Ottomans were tired and disheartened. Despite that, they were 3-1 over the relief army. As the two forces set about clashing with each other, nobody could have anticipated the massacre that was destined to follow. The first day of battle was a stalemate, with each side taking heavy casualties. The next day, however, the European coalition took another heavy blow. One of their members, George Rákóczi, Prince of Transylvania, launched a premature attack on the Ottomans and was routed. Deflated, he returned to Vienna, anticipating the worst. At the same time, Kara Mustafa, sensing triumph, commanded his troops to storm the city again, aiming to take it before the Europeans had time to reassemble. But then he committed a crucial error. He underestimated the resolve of the defenders within the city and the size of the relief army in reserve. He also failed to appreciate the danger posed by those he also did not realize the threat that lay in those very wings. As the Ottoman troops attacked, Vienna's defenders stood firm, pushing back wave after wave of attackers. Later in the afternoon, as the Ottomans launched another push, European cavalry finally charged. The charging cavalry dashed forward while the Ottoman infantry retreated before it, creating the illusion that the battle was turning against the Turks. But somehow they were able to stand their ground. Then, from the hills in front of them, the beat of drums and trumpets pierced above the clash of war. The 6,000 winged hussars waited for their hour of glory. With a deafening roar, they urged their steeds on. Even at the appearance of these 6,000 horsemen riding towards them with raised swords, Kara Mustafa's troops ran from their ranks and away. The rest of the Ottoman cavalry attempted to halt them, but they, as well, were repelled. By the time that the Winged Hussars entered the battle, the Ottoman army was already in full flight. This was the start of the biggest cavalry charge ever. Led by King John III Sobieski, the Europeans chased the fleeing Ottomans over the Karansib's plain, slashing down everyone who got in their way. The Polish king rode at the front, his best armor shining, astride his destrier, a huge warhorse that loomed over him. He sported a golden crown adorned with ostrich feathers, which reflected his double function as king and warrior. His lance was carried overhead by a page who sat behind him. Whenever a king of Poland led his army into battle, he left behind his royal scepter so that another could hold in his stead the scepter of power. But if he returned from the battle, he would resume grasping his scepter and return to court. Today, though, such a transfer would not be necessary. The triumphant Europeans pitched camp on the battlefield as the sun went down. Of the 120,000 Ottomans who'd besieged Vienna, barely any were left alive. Among the dead was Kara Mustafa Pasha, whose head was severed and displayed on the gallows at the city gate as a warning to anyone who might one day threaten Vienna again. Meanwhile, within the city, the defenders who'd managed to survive were shocked into silence by the sight of the severed head. Hours earlier, it had looked as though the Ottomans would triumph for certain. Now their commander was killed, and the siege was finished. The threat of invasion by the East hung over Europe for centuries. Since the Ottoman Turks burst forth out of Asia Minor early in the 14th century, capturing Constantinople in 1453, the Turkish tide seemed irresistible. By the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire stretched from the North Sea to the Persian Gulf, controlling many of the most important trade routes between Europe and Asia. They also controlled Hungary, which gave them access to the heart of Europe. From there, the Ottomans captured Budapest in 1541 and divided the nation into three pieces, retaining the northern third, which contained the capital, and had two of their vassal princes govern the southern halves. The Ottomans had been advancing progressively closer to Vienna, the capital of Austria, ever since. But the city had twice been saved in 1529 and 1667 by the arrival of Polish troops led by King John III Sobieski. The Ottomans returned in 1683, but this time more heavily. Vienna had been under siege for 3 weeks and was about to fall when John III and his Winged Hussars arrived. When the Polish king rode into Vienna the next day after the battle, he was received as a hero. His 18,000 horsemen had achieved one of the most great victories in the history of Europe, not only defending the city of Vienna, but the whole of the continent. But yet, in spite of their magnificent victory, the Polish horsemen had to depart unheralded. The Austrians distrusted foreign soldiers on their ground and would not allow them to remain. Unpaid and disillusioned, the Poles broke up and went home. Subsequently, as the Austrians resumed the siege works and moved in to retake Hungary, they soon forgot their distrust and recalled the appreciation they'd had when the Polish cavalry arrived. But for the Poles, Vienna would have been taken by the Ottomans, maybe even the rest of Europe as well. Rather, thanks to the bravery of those 18,000 horsemen, the Ottomans had to retreat and thus marked the start of the end of their empire. But even in their defeat, the Ottoman Empire would endure, lasting until 1922, and thus becoming the longest surviving civilization to date. Thanks for watching.